I wanted to make sure we gave out our thank yous to California Center for Ethics and Policy, Government and External Affairs, Bronco Advocacy League, Digital Humanities Consortium, and of course you all for being here and engaging in this conversation with us. Yeah, clap it up, clap yourselves up. I appreciate it. I'm trying to get some more energy. All right, and so bigger context. So there's an election happening sometime soon. Yeah, it's going to be a big one. Who here in the room by applause has already registered to vote? Yeah, excellent. If you have already registered, have you checked and updated your registration? If you've moved, yeah. All right, couple claps. I'll take that. How many of y'all have already gotten your mail-in ballot? Yeah, for sure. Doing research on your candidates, on ballot measures. Yeah. Excellent. It's a lot of work. We got time, so no worries if you haven't clapped that part up. If you're anything like me, civic engagement for most of my life was just showing up every 4 years to cast my vote, right? But there are so many other ways that we can be civically engaged. We can talk civilly with our family over the dinner table, or maybe less civilly if you're from my household. You can research and vote down ballot in your local elections, choosing city council members, doing research into ballot, and if you're especially mindful and demure, you could research your Superior Court judge candidates there as well. You can also get involved with campaigns, phone banking, as our earlier speakers have mentioned, writing postcards to battleground states, canvassing local neighborhoods or even out-of-area neighborhoods. There are lots of ways to be involved in the next few weeks. Even beyond that, I have learned that there are ways of being civically engaged beyond just the elections, right? Like holding our elected officials accountable, calling up the offices, sending emails about issues and stances that you are passionate about, right? So another step could be to take, could be serving your community by serving as an election worker. During the election fair in a little bit, you'll have an opportunity to sign up potentially as a bilingual community election worker, and that's a way to give folks who don't speak English as their primary language, to give them access to democracy. So that's one way. Or you could, like our featured speaker today, work full-time as an election official. And so I'm really incredibly excited and honored to have with us today and to share with you all a conversation with our featured speaker, Jackie Wu. So Jackie Wu is an experienced consultant specializing in nonprofit advocacy, voter outreach and engagement, and election administration. She previously worked as the community outreach manager for the Orange County Registrar of Voters, the 5th largest voting jurisdiction in the United States, from 2017 to 2021. During this time, Jackie was responsible for overseeing the translation of election materials into 9 languages, election worker training, pop-up voting, social media, legislation, and outreach to approximately 2 million voters. Jackie's past experiences also include working as a government administrator at the municipal level and for the California State Senate. She's been featured on NPR, as well as in the Los Angeles Times and Cal Matters, and she has offered presentations and workshops on voting and the election process to numerous organizations. So if you could join me in please giving a loud and warm Cal Poly Pomona welcome to Jackie Wu. All right, so Jackie, we were on the way over here, we're talking, this is a long time coming. You've published a book here. You've gotten praise from a who's who list of political figures, including our current California Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber, legendary political strategist Bill Wong. You've been profiled by the LA Times, the Orange County Register. So my question to you to just get us started is, how are you going to fix our democracy?
Wow, not a tall order at all. But I mean, it goes to show for all of us, we each have our own different ways, like you were mentioning, Steve, that we could play a role in contributing to protecting our democracy. And you've just mentioned some of the ways that I've decided to do it, is through a book sharing what it's like to actually work as an election official, because I think, as some of you may remember in high school, learning about how government works, but not really getting into the nitty-gritty of it, of what goes in order, has to happen in order to run an election. And that's why I wanted to write this book, to show what happens actually behind the scenes, because I thought I was pretty engaged in voting in elections prior to working as an election official, but I didn't know all the work that goes into getting your ballot and your voter information guide. There's so many hours, so many people involved in order to make that happen before voting even starts.
Absolutely. And so the thing I really love about this book is it's part biography, it is part an instructional, it is part pulling back the curtain on all of these things. And to your point, to reiterate, it takes more than one person to help protect and engage people in our democracy. And so we'll definitely get into the bits and pieces of that conversation, but before we dive into that, I wanted to learn a little bit more about your background. And so I imagine we know that as children of immigrants, we often get messages that, oh, don't be a doctor, don't be an engineer, those are boring. Go spend long, hard hours working at the county registrar protecting democracy. So I imagine you got similar pressures. No, I'm joking, clearly. I'm curious to hear what your path was, kind of your background. Tell us a little bit about your family, your background story, and how you became interested in the pathway you took to get to the registrar's office.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say there is some truth to that. So the choices between doctor, engineer, or lawyer, which I chose none of them. My story begins with my family's story. They were Vietnamese refugees. So as a result of war, my family came over to here with literally nothing. But that, I think, encouraged a question for me to ask, well, why did they come here? And how come things are a certain way, and how do I empower my family and my community? And I saw that through the U.S. was through getting politically involved and figuring out, well, is it through working for a city, understanding how a city works, understanding how the state works, how legislation gets passed, and then how does voting happen, and what opportunities, what resources and services are available to our communities through those different levels of government.
Excellent. And so when did this start for you, this interest in government? Was this like, what, junior high? Were you one of those kids that followed presidential elections, listened to the radio under the covers?
I will say that it was a long journey. I knew in high school that I was interested in government and politics, but I think I was still under that spell, like, maybe, yeah, I could still become a pharmacist. Maybe I could still go to doctoral school. So even up until college, I will say that I took a different route than most people, because I entered college actually as a biomedical engineer, pre-med, which was like, I didn't even take physics. And I don't know why, I actually do know why, because I felt all that pressure from my family and from my community that this was the way to success, not knowing that there were other types of models of success that I could follow. So it kind of became an elimination round. I remember being in the dorms with my dorm mates, and we literally had all the majors listed out, and we like crossed out which ones that we couldn't do. And the list got smaller and smaller, and eventually over the years, finally declared, I think, junior year as political science.
Excellent. And then from political science, there are so many clear paths for people to step into, especially as a child of immigrants who have parents that can clearly guide you in that. Again, this is my second language of sarcasm. So from political science, what did you do next, and how did you step into a career?
I'm going to date myself a little bit. So around that time was the 2008 elections, and that was, a really pivotal year, just like this year as well. There was a lot of in the news talking about how to get involved, the different issues that were at stake at the time. We had friends that were in the Iraq War and serving, and feeling how unfair it was for my friends to be there while I was here. And also at the same time came up the marriage equality as well, and how that was also unfair, and seeing how people that I felt leaders at the time that were not connected with their communities, making laws that were going to affect the lives of my friends and my families.
Excellent. And so, right out of college, where did your first, you have had many chapters of your career so far. What was your first chapter after college, and how did you find your way there?
I would say that my first chapter right out of college was actually not a job. It was an internship in Washington, D.C. So for those that have the ability to take on internships, and you don't have to wait until after college. If you're able to even take ones during school, just 5 hours here and there, it can go a long ways. And my first internship was with a nonprofit organization. And I tried explaining this to my parents. When you translate nonprofit in Chinese, it means no money. And they're like, this is not going to go well. But I always knew that I wanted to do something that was meaningful to me. And I couldn't see myself doing something that wasn't. And I've stayed true to that, of always putting myself first, and the opportunities will follow that.
So you had this internship in DC, which led you to work, have a position within the California State Senate as well. Can you share a little bit about what that role was and your responsibilities in that position?
Yeah, so this was during the Great Recession, and I think I was applying to probably hundreds of jobs at the time. I eventually got onto a listserv where I found this job opportunity for a state senator, and they were looking for a community district representative. So you would be assigned certain cities, certain legislative topics that you would be able to report back to the state senator. And I was able to submit my application in, my resume, and they did highlight the fact that I had multiple different internships, and they were all internships to different areas that I was interested in. So LGBT rights, the API community, the San Gabriel Valley, which was where I'm from, and that combination made me a solid candidate for that role.
Excellent. And so, as I imagine many of the students in the room, you have your career path, or you have your majors, but you may not be sure about what the career path is. What kind of jobs can I get? What are the job skills I need to step into these sort of roles? And I know for this generation especially, there is a want to do good in the world, make the world a better place, but also to do well for yourselves, take care of yourself, take care of your families. And so in thinking about that and thinking about the intersection of potential career paths in the public sector, what are some of the skill sets or things that folks can bring to the table? Cal Poly Pomona is big on, some of the popular majors are engineering. We're a STEM school here. Psychology, business is also big. What are the intersections with these sort of majors and some of the skill sets or that you brought to the table in these roles, or you've seen some of your colleagues in these spaces bring to the role?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Steve. I will say that regardless of what major that you have, there are opportunities within the public sector. Everything that you see in the private sector, there's probably a public sector version of it. I will say the skills that I think really helped me when I was in my government roles included being flexible, not afraid to take on a challenge, be willing to learn, and also leverage your network. So I cannot speak enough in terms of building your network, having something that you build a reputation, what you're known for being good at, what you're interested in, and people in your network knowing that about you as well. So that not only are you, when you're looking for opportunities, you also have an additional layer of folks within your community looking out for you as well.
And so, as a child of immigrants myself, without a larger community here that had a lot of connections across different sectors, this idea of networking was very foreign to me, and it's still something I continue to develop and work on and grow my skills in. Like, what did that look like for you in terms of the learning curve and figuring out what it means to network? And what are some tips and tricks that you could share with some of the students in here that might be like, networking sounds cool, but what do I do?
Yeah, I totally get that, and I will consider myself as someone who's an introverted extrovert or a shy extrovert. So networking was very daunting, especially as a college student at the time. I remember I interned at a nonprofit organization that was really kind enough. When I told them that I was nervous about this, they paired me with someone who was a leader within the nonprofit, so that when we would go to these networking opportunities, I had someone next to me that I felt comfortable like saying like, "Ooh, I need to take a step back. Would you mind leading?" Or like, "Oh, I feel brave enough to like try being the one that does the first initial ask of like engaging someone if they want to speak." Another tip that I would give for networking is to find other people in the room. Like if you are there by yourself, that can be really intimidating, and you may see other people who are also by themselves, or people who are engaging a lot of people, and you can add yourself onto there.
Absolutely. And as an introverted extrovert myself, one pro tip that I was able to develop is just recognizing like the whole imposter syndrome that we oftentimes feel in classes, at school. Same in networking. Like everybody who's networking is nervous. Oh, this is going to be awkward. Like, wow, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. Everybody's feeling that. So I would encourage, and it's helped me to bring down the expectations or the stakes. Like you're gonna have awkward conversations. That happens every day anyway, right? You meet folks in your class and you're like, hey, what's going on? And it's, oh, okay. I guess we're not a match. We're not gonna be friends or in a study group together, right? Totally fine. Networking is the exact same thing. You all already do that work, right? So from that, you were able to build up a network, you were able to build up an incredible reputation, and you shifted gears and joined the Orange County Registrar of Voters. Tell us a little bit about that transition and what were the skill sets that you brought along with you, and what were some of the new ones also that you were able to develop while you were there in that role?
Yeah, so I remember seeing the job posting for the Orange County Registrar of Voters Community Outreach Manager, and I remember sharing with lots of my other friends, and then looking at it like, wait a second, I'm interested in this. So also to remind yourself that when you see opportunities, to put yourself forward too, because I know sometimes it's really easy, like, well, let me pass it on to someone else. Some of the skills that I thought were really helpful in my role specifically as a community outreach manager was those network connections that I had, that I knew people from different communities, different language communities, and being able to be that bridge between the government office and the community. Some things that I really learned while working as an election official was event planning and just planning in general. For an election, the date is set. It's not going to change. Even the pandemic did not change election day in 2020. And you have to plan backwards. You learn to work with different teams. You have to learn how to negotiate, especially when it comes to resources and staff that you may need to in order to get something done.
One of the things that really struck me about when I was reading through your book was, you know, your official title is Community Outreach Manager, but you did so many different things. You were not only outreaching to communities, but you're also playing a role of public relations and connecting with the media and talking with news channels. You were also human resources, trying to figure out what is the best policy in this brand new pandemic world of how do we take care of our staff. You are also an educator and kind of trying to think through what are the tools and resources and training that we need to build out so that we can make voting as accessible. You wore so many different hats. One, I was really impressed and like overwhelmed by the amount of skills and work that you had to do with your team, but also thinking about how are the ways that students can kind of connect what they're doing currently in their classes, in student organizations, the ways that they're developing that could translate into these sort of roles.
Yeah, so the way I look at election administration is you're planning for something similar to like the Super Bowl. It's one big day, there's lots of different pieces. You're planning a big party, you're sent out invitations to 2 million people, sent out ballots to them, hoping that you'll get 100% turnout. And you have voters who are speaking different languages, have different levels of education, and you want to make it as accessible as possible for them. And I think what you put in mind is how do I create the best voter experience for them? How do you create the best experience for anyone that you're working around? How do you create a welcoming environment, an environment that they trust and that they want to continue coming back to vote?
Yeah. One of the other things I was really struck by was this emphasis on team. Throughout the book, you just emphasized just having a really strong team that was motivated and driven by similar values as you. And so as our students are thinking about their career paths, thinking about their first job, I know for me coming out of college, I was like, I will take any job that pays me. And oftentimes that led to jobs that weren't a good fit for me. Thinking about those ideas of team, about similar values, like what are some of the tips that you could give to our audience here, and thinking about like how should I think about the next steps in my career after I graduate and find my first job?
I was right there with you in terms of trying to get the first job that I could out of college. I think I was very fortunate to find an office that shared a lot of my similar values, but that's been tested, I think, since. Because I think something that happens when you are very, very values-driven, you're very mission-motivated, is that unfortunately, it's easy, they know your weak spot in the sense that they can, unfortunately, sometimes exploit. So I think not only is it important to find out what your values are, what your beliefs are, and matching them with an organization and a role that supports that, but also learning how to create firm boundaries so that that doesn't happen to you.
Ooh, boundaries. I love that. Can I ask you more? What do you mean by boundaries? Can you give some examples of when you felt those boundaries were tested?
Yeah, so working as an election official, I'll share it as an example. And it is extreme situations because it's very, again, calendar driven. But I'll share like working until 3 a.m. To get the ballot done by any means necessary in order to meet mailing deadlines. Working on holidays, working on weekends after weekend. Those are examples of when I look back as when I was an election official, I wish I pushed back on it more instead of volunteering for it. And also having those expectations of my staff. Because I knew if they had to work those hours as well, I wanted to demonstrate to them as their manager that I would also be willing to put in the same work.
Absolutely. So being clear on what your personal boundaries are, and also kind of what is the lifestyle you want to live. If you want to grind because you are committed and passionate about an issue, absolutely do it. Find the right team, find the right organization, find the right issues. But if you're like, I want to have a balanced lifestyle, I want to have a weekend, I don't want to disappear into the mist, make sure that you're finding organizations that are in alignment with your values as well. Excellent. So we talked a lot about your experiences and career path and the lessons you've learned along the way. I want to kind of dig into the specifics of the 2020 election that you really outlined and really captured in this. I know as someone who observes and watches a lot of political news, all the things that were happening in 2020, but I felt like you were able to kind of dive in specifically to Orange County that wasn't necessarily in the national news a lot, but share a lot about what were some of the dynamics that were happening with the election, as well as a time capsule of the things that were the natural disasters that were happening, the people that were showing up at the polling places, the challenges that you encountered. And so, yeah, I would love to talk with you a little bit more about what it was like being an election official that is responsible for 2 million people getting access to 2 million people in the middle of a global pandemic. Like, what was that moment like when you heard, all right, we're as a county, as a state, as a nation, we're shutting everything down, but we still need to make sure that everybody has access to voting?
Yeah, I mean, those were some really wild times. I think all of us in 2020, we were still trying to figure out, was this something that they thought was going to end by the summer of 2020? That was not the case. And by the time that we got around to June, we're like, are we going to do all mail-in ballots? Are we going to do in-person voting too for the 2020 general election? And we did finally receive that guidance from Governor Newsom through an executive order that we would have in-person voting, and then that would create a whole new set of challenges, because the way that we had voting operations when you go to an in-person vote center, prior to 2020, it was right next to each other. You did not have 6 feet between folks, and we needed to change all of election worker training. We needed to change what kind of equipment that we had. Did we have enough antibacterial wipes, for example? Did we need to get disposable pens? And really think from A to Z, starting over on how to design voting under a pandemic.
As well as being under a hard deadline.
Yes, under a hard deadline, and also lots of pressure as well. That was a very contentious election year. You may remember lots of political movements that were happening at the time, and they were all happening at once. In Orange County, it was the birthplace of the anti-mask movement. We had Black Lives Matters, anti-Asian hate, all happening, creating that kind of social dynamic that was playing out in the voting place.
Absolutely. And then, while those are specific movements that were happening in that moment, there was an environment also of eroding public trust in election integrity. Can you talk a little bit about how that showed up in your work, how you as in your role and with your team plan to manage that, and what were some of the things that you had observed in the election?
Yeah, appreciate that. I think in 2020 we started to see a lot of doubt about the vote-by-mail system. There was concerns about the U.S. Postal Service being able to deliver on time. There were delays. There was concerns of being underfunded, especially during that lead up to the election period. And this is where we worked really closely with the USPS in Orange County to make sure that as soon as we were getting our ballots, we would go directly to the USPS. They'd have an advance notice that we're dropping 2 million ballots off, and we want them to go out over this weekend. We had tracking on all of our ballots, which I also believe is true in LA County and other counties as well, that once it's scanned through the Postal Service, you can actually see it where it is in the process, and to make sure that it's returned back to our office correctly.
Absolutely. So these are just a few of what was going on in that election. And I was really struck by this short passage in your book where you wrote, "It felt like democracy and the future of the United States were on the line, and we could lose it all if we didn't play our little role in ensuring that we conducted the election as best we could and make voting as accessible as possible." And so, question to you, follow-up to you is, that feels heavy. That feels like a lot to be an election worker and feeling like you are shouldering this incredible burden. Like how, I imagine that that could have an impact on your mental health, your physical health. Like if you're comfortable, if you could share a little bit about kind of what was going on, going through your mind as you were navigating these myriad challenges.
Yeah, I think thank you, Steve, for reading that passage. I think it does hold truth, though, and even to this election cycle as well, that we all have a role to play in protecting democracy, whether that is working as an election official, as a poll worker on election day, or even just casting a ballot. I think that we can't take it for granted, and I think that what we do collectively together will overcome all the challenges that we see towards democracy.
Absolutely. So appreciate all of the things that you outlined in 2020. Thankfully, all those challenges have been overcome, and this election is going to be smooth as butter, right? To that end, this is, as I mentioned, like a time capsule of 2020, and we know that there continue to be challenges, continues to be questions around election integrity. You have since moved on from the OC Registrar's office, and I'd be curious to see, if, having stepped away from being in the belly of it, like what are some of the changes you have seen in the run-up to this election, both positive and the negative, and what do you anticipate as being some of the bigger challenges?
I think since leaving the Registrar of Voters, definitely mental health was one. It's important to take a break and take care of yourself. So even if you don't know if you want to be an election official full-time or a poll worker, just know that it can be a limited term thing. So since then, you know, we were able to see the 2020 election was conducted as one of the most secure elections in U.S. history. So we've shown that we can run an election even with these great challenges that were posed at the time, having to change everything from A to Z in a short amount of time. I will say that in 2024, we've seen some new challenges pop up We've seen some voting rights and access be rolled back. So for example, some states, not like California, where they automatically send you a vote-by-mail ballot. If you're registered to vote, some states require you to have an excuse or to have a reason to be able to receive a vote-by-mail ballot, or make it even more restrictive. We've seen some places cut down on ballot drop box locations and have fewer polling places or vote centers that make it more challenging. But I will say a bright spot that I can see is that we're having a more honest conversation about these challenges that we're facing. Whereas I think in the past, we may not have wanted to say something to keep the peace, but we're seeing that by doing that, we're doing that as a disservice to ourselves and to democracy.
Absolutely. And so just to highlight some of the challenges we're talking about, from my observation, the national media is a lot about what is being said publicly, right? But we also know that there's a lot of stuff being done behind the scenes to undermine and stack the deck, so to speak. And so all that is to say is, I encourage everybody to stay engaged, stay involved, stay educated and learning, continuing to learn, and engaging with your communities where you can, all right? And so we are going to shift to a question and answer period. But before we do that, we're going to play a quick game that's going to require a little bit of audience participation. While we're doing this game, I want folks in the room, if you have a question, for folks to think about what is a question that you would like to ask Jackie, and then we'll shift after the game to that. So go ahead and take the time now to think about it. If you want to write it out, just so we're a little bit tighter on the questions and answers, I'd appreciate that. So the game we're going to play is what I'm going to call Down for Democracy. Yeah! And how it's going to work is I have 3 national news items supporting democracy, like stories of students around the nation, around in different places supporting democracy. And I am Jackie here is going to blind rate them by the woos. You can give it a 1 woo or 2 woos or 3 woos, like a woo for democracy. And then I'm going to ask for y'all's help in supporting the woos. So first news is we have students at an unnamed university here at Cal Poly Pomona who have signed up to serve as bilingual community election workers to support access in their communities for all people to participate in that. So, Jackie, how many woos would you give that? 2, 3 woos? 3 woos. All right, say more. Why?
I think what we see in election administration is actually these folks that are election officials and also election workers are people that we know. There are family members, our neighbors, people who are in our classes with each other, and I think you know your community best. So when you go serve at the polls, you get to help those that are within your community.
Absolutely. And for this opportunity, you actually get paid, so even better. Even better. So can I get a woo for people? Woo! Woo! All right. Next one is we have, sorry, I have a sheet written out here. So at Harold Washington College, a community college in Chicago, students Naina Pandhare and Olive Harvey, college student Levitica Crawford, were named to All-In Student Voting Honor Roll. These are students who made the list, were recognized for going above and beyond to advance nonpartisan student voter registration, education, and turnout efforts in their communities. They were the driving force in getting their campuses registered and to the ballot box in 2023. So how many woos would you give this one?
I don't know how I can give anything less than the max. 3.
3 woos. Can I get a woo from the crowd? Woo! Yeah, we have students all over the nation who are engaged and doing work to make sure their campuses and students and their communities are engaged as well. And so hopefully you all have thought of some good questions to ask Jackie, because we have our last piece of Down for Democracy that I wanted to share. A former election worker went on to found their own political consulting organization and has helped CSU Fullerton with their ballot bowl to be a leader amongst the CSUs this year. How many woos you give that, Jackie?
Also 3 woos.
3 woos. Can I get a woo from the crowd? Woo! So, fun fact, that former election worker that went on to found their own political consulting organization to help CSU Fullerton, that's kind of a less of a woo, that's a quieter woo here at Cal Poly Pomona, is actually our featured speaker here today, Jackie Wu. So yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to Jackie and for all the work that you are continuing to do. So
Thank you, everyone.
let's clap it up. And then we'll save some time and space for folks who might have any questions for Jackie. If you could just raise your hand, and we do have a mic runner that can run a mic over to y'all if you got a question. We got a question up front?
Hello, my name's Aiden, and thank you for being here today. My question for you is, I know that you have the book written. Where can we find a copy of this book?
Thank you, and thank you so much, Zayden, and everyone else for coming. The book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and also I believe we'll be giving out some books away as well.
Perfect question. So after we wrap up here at the election fair, Jackie will actually have a table where she will be signing and giving away free books to y'all. So you can get your own copy signed for free. So if y'all are down, come by the election fair, come visit all the tables as well as Jackie's. Woo! Appreciate that. Other questions?
Hi, my name's Everett. So you touched on it for a little bit, and I just want to kind of follow up on one thing that makes the democracy a healthy one is voter accessibility to cast your vote, correct? So we've seen this rise in rhetoric of like kind of, I guess, vilifying mail-in balloting as well as like more gerrymandering. And I mean, even in Georgia, I believe voters were not allowed to have water while they were waiting in line. So I would just want to touch on why you think this rhetoric has grown from specifically one side.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Everett. I will say that I think that it has grown because I look at it 2 ways. One that comes from a fear-based mindset and more of a hopeful mindset. And unfortunately for communities that have struggled a lot, it's easier to hear more with the fear-based mindset. And if there's nothing that counters it, there's nothing that offers hope, it's easy to go into a spiral. And then when you get disengaged, you're not involved, you're not voting for people who are elected into office. These people who are elected into the office that share these kind of views can make it into law. And if we don't get engaged, we don't vote, we're not able to counter that because that's not within the system that we currently operate in. So I hope that's encouragement to folks to get involved. If you don't like what you see, have your voice heard, run for office, become an election official, become an election worker, but do not just see that, oh, that happens, and we're gonna let it happen. Thank you.
And I would say, add to that, again, as someone who watches and consumes a lot of national news, like we see the protests that are happening in, like, for example, the state capitals around our nation. And that is certainly one way to get civically engaged, and one way, that's near and dear to my heart. But there are so many steps before that that we as individuals can get engaged. And to our earlier speaker, talking about getting our communities, our friends engaged, calling up our local city council members around issues, calling up our congressional representatives, our Senate representatives, and being like, hey, how are you making voting or democracy much more accessible to everybody, right? Like we're here now, there's a problem with gerrymandering, there's a problem with ballot requirements and people being purged off of the rolls. Like those are the many, many steps before we get to the, the protesting and occupying space, the peaceful protests that we've seen. So there's ways that we can continue to be engaged and making our voices heard beyond just voting, beyond just, yeah. So that's my 2 cents with that. You have another question?
Everett. So as an election official worker, I just want to get like more of your personal insights on what transpired after the election, where a former presidential candidate said, even before the votes were confirmed, he said, or this person said, frankly, we won the election, even though the mail-in ballots were still counting. Leading up to that was obviously like one of the deadliest or most heartbreaking days of American history, which is January 6th, where we see this organized violence. And when I mean organized, it's not lawlessness when they went through the Supreme Court to try and overturn the election. So I guess my question is, seeing that as an official like election worker, what were your thoughts that day when those months happened? During a pandemic too, so it's like a lot going on.
Yeah, January 6th was a very pivotal date, I think, in my life. Because on that day, you know, we were just coming back from the holidays. We're like, oh, we made it through the election. The hardest days are behind us now. That was not true. That day, I remember we were supposed to debrief about the election. We saw what was happening on the East Coast in D.C. The videos were starting to come in. And it was kind of surreal. It was like, is this really happening? Am I watching the overthrow of our government while I'm supposed to go to another meeting right now? I think we need to cancel this meeting. So fortunately, we did. But in the days, months after, it really struck me as like, I understood that what they were protesting, what they were trying to overthrow was not just happening 3,000 miles away, but it was going to affect all of us in this country. And they were protesting or trying to overturn election results for all of us, not just what was happening in DC, and that had a really close and emotional tie to what was happening here. Does that answer your question, or was there more to it that you wanted to cover? Thank you.
I think we have a question in the back.
I know you're not a poll worker anymore, but for who will be going to the polls, how can they rely on poll workers if they maybe have questions? What's the scope of your role in person, maybe on election day or at polling centers?
Yeah, so in-person voting is great because that's a place that you can go to with any question. And the idea is that even if the people there don't have the answers to the questions that you have, they can connect you back to someone in the main central office to get you that nonpartisan, verified official response from the elections office.
Oh, got a question up front.
Hi, as a person who's now like mainly in Orange County, like going to training to be in a public service, how do you like navigate discussions with people who are just like overtly opposed to like your position, like what you want to do? Like, do you isolate yourself and just not listen to what they're saying? Do you hide out in academia, your own bubble? Like, can you foster healthy discourse with these people, or you just have to not say anything?
Ooh, good question. Welcome to Orange County. I will say that that's a personal decision. I think that if you feel safe enough to share your beliefs, share your views with others, that's definitely up to you. However, I know that that can feel very nervous and scary because you don't know what the other beliefs that other people have. I think there's a lot of tools and resources on how to have a civil discourse with people that you disagree with. And it's not just something that you do once. It's something that you do on an ongoing basis, that you learn to build that like muscle, that confidence in being able to communicate with people that don't share the same views as you. But at the same time, something that I learned while working as a district representative for the state senate, when you dealt with every population and people that may not be coming to you with like good intentions to have like an honest civil discussion with you, is also to, again, set boundaries. Like I'm trying to have a civil discourse with you, but you are yelling at me. If you're not going to stop this, we cannot have this conversation. So I think being able to go in with that mindset will go a long ways.
Okay, just to expand on that, how do you approach like bad faith questions, like questions that are based on false beliefs or just kind of inflammatory, trying to provoke you?
Yeah, I would say spin it. I would say you don't have, just because you're asked a question doesn't necessarily mean you have to respond to it directly, because you can say that I understand what you're trying to ask me, but actually I want to talk to you about this. Instead of feeding it fire, like giving more life to it and trying to go down the path or the trick that they're trying to have on you.
There's been a lot of national dialogue around, hey, we need to turn down the temperature, right? We need to get back to civil dialogue. unfortunately, our public officials aren't necessarily the best models for that, right? And so I would encourage folks to find those models, right? Like I know there are, well, I'll say this. We're in a day and an age where it seems like whichever political side of the spectrum you're on, it's a fight for survival. It's good versus evil, whichever side you're on, right? And my perspective is let's lower the stakes a little bit, so it's not so all or nothing, and let's try to engage in civil dialogue and not go in with I need to change this person's mind. Let's just first engage in a conversation, because conversations, any sort of changing conversation that I've had in my life has been through the relationship I've had with the person, not necessarily the content of the conversation, right? It's a relationship that leads, that allows me to be open to the content in the conversation. So that's my experience and suggestion.
And I'll share a quote that has stayed with me that I think might be helpful, is that change happens at the speed of trust, and that is with relationships. So even if you disagree with someone politically or in other ways, sometimes you realize, well, I trust them. And I know that this may not be the conversation that changes, their perspective, their beliefs, but as long as, we have respect for each other, genuine respect, we can be moving along the progress to eventually get there.
Do we have one last question?
Hi, again. Over the last few years, not only within this country, but around the globe, we've seen the rise of far-right politics. A politics that's largely based off of fear and, targets disenfranchised citizens. Do you believe that it's possible to move towards a more hopeful politics, one where we can have a world without violence? And if so, how would you do that?
That's like the question to how do you solve for world peace?
Nice light question to wrap up our conversation here, right?
Well, I think it all begins at the individual level before we can have collective hope. So I think if we can build individual hope just through small exchanges that we have with each other, if someone is having a hard day, lending some of your light to them, they lend their light to others, and eventually I hope that builds collectively a more hopeful society. I think that hope is necessary in order for us to achieve a future without violence and a future where we can truly be accepted and included as well. So I think the antidote is hope. But how do we get hope? I think that's a very personal and difficult conversation to have, because unfortunately, many of us in our society, we've gone through difficult challenges, and it's not just what we encounter right now, but it could be generational trauma that has been passed on, geopolitical things that are happening outside of the U.S. but are still impacting us here. So taking that on into consideration as a multiracial, very diverse society, how do we build hope collectively is a true big question that I think we are all faced to have.
And with that, what a perfect place to end there. Oh my goodness. Yeah, let's give our speaker Jackie one last round of applause. And so my hope is that you all have been inspired to think about what's the next level that I can take to get involved. Many are already here, you're already involved, you're already thinking about voting. Like, what is the next step? What is the next thing that I can do? And so, as we mentioned, the election fair is going to have some immediate opportunities for you all to take advantage of that. So I hope you all can have an opportunity to take advantage of those opportunities, and also think about how you might apply what you're learning, your involvement here at college, and how you might apply that in the public sector. We need more folks who are honest brokers and passionate about getting and creating access for others to participate in our great democracy here. And so next, what's happening next is the election fair again. We'll make a reminder that Jackie's going to be hanging out with us At the election fair, there will be a book signing, so come by, get your book signed. The book is free, and you can have a more one-on-one conversation with Jackie. And another thing that we'll also be having is we're going to host a VIP reception for Jackie. So if folks want to have more smaller group connections with each other, I mean, we have a lot of folks who are engaged and leaders on campus here. If you want an opportunity to chat and connect with each other, as well as having more conversation with Jackie, that'll be next door in Ursa Major B, starting around 1:15-ish, all right? And we'll have boba. Food will be at the election fair. We're going to have boba tea for folks to put a sweetened end of the day and event for you all there. So with that, thank you all again, and we'll see you soon.